It's time to talk about Diddy.
Isn't she just a lawyer? Can't she just stick with that? I mean, she thinks she knows everything.
Let's talk everything.
It's everything.
Welcome back to another episode of the Emajae Talks Everything podcast, where I talk politics, I talk pop culture, and everything that there could possibly be in between. I am Emajae, and today on this podcast, we are going to talk about Diddy. It is time. It is a point of this podcast that I have talked about here and there throughout other pods. I've mentioned the fact that I was going to bring up Diddy, I was going to talk about it, but I was going to wait until there was a verdict. And there was a reason for that. And we're going to get into the reason for that, as I know the verdict surprised a bunch of people. So this episode is about Diddy. We have got to talk about it. Before I get into it, though, I do want to start and preface by saying the opinions that I hold, the perspective that I'm going to share in terms of what I think went right, what I think went wrong in terms of the outcome of this case, they are my opinions. Okay, so disclaimer, they are my opinions. This is my analysis. I'm not speaking for or on behalf of anyone else other than Emajae. So I just want to start there. And let's get into it. Let's start with everything in the news. And the only thing we're talking about, like I said today, is going to be Diddy. So let's just jump right in. This entire case is really, really interesting. And the reason why I find it interesting is because there's so many different overlapping conversations that tie back to this case, right? There's conversations that we can have around power. There's conversations that we can have around the culture. And so many of those conversations kind of collide into one case. And so I want to kind of take it back a little bit in terms of how do we even get here? So back in 2023, November of 2023, Cassie, right? Cassie is Diddy's ex-girlfriend, and she is a key player in everything that went down. And so back in November of 2023, seemingly out of nowhere, Cassie files this against Diddy, accusing him of a word that rhymes with grape and also accusing him of abuse. That case made the news, and within 24 hours, the case was settled. Okay. So what that means is before we even got to a point where we can get through litigation, get through a trial, get to witnesses, Diddy said, I'm going to pay you what you're asking so that you can go away. Okay. And that is what I believe he hoped would happen. However, I'm pretty sure that when Cassie filed that lawsuit, Diddy was put on notice that this was not going away anytime soon, right? Because if you read what Cassie put out in terms of her allegations against Diddy, it was, there was like a disclaimer at the beginning of her complaint in terms of recounting everything that happened. They literally put a warning at the beginning of it because it was so graphic of allegations and details in terms of her abuse, right? But the point of that is that wrapped up within 24 hours. And then not too long after that, September of 2024, we see that Diddy was indicted. That's where he caught his federal indictment. And those charges included sex trafficking, racketeering, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy, he denied all of his those allegations. He yeah, he denied all of the, he pled not guilty to every single one of those allegations. He said, I'm going to take it to trial. That he did. And as of May 2025, so just, 2 months ago, trial began. And here we are as of July 2nd, 2024. So it's a few days after July 2nd. We have a verdict now. But as of July 2nd of 2025, the jury reached a split verdict. Now, a split verdict essentially means that there are a series of charges and the jury came out to different outcomes based on, whatever charge. So it means that we knew that we weren't going to get all guilty or all not guilty. They found him guilty on some and not guilty on others. Okay. So that's just a bit of the framework of where we are right now. In terms of the verdict, right? Let's talk about the actual verdict itself. We see count 1 was a racketeering conspiracy. So for short, you might be familiar with that being called a RICO charge. He was found not guilty. For count 2, that was sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion in relation to Cassie. He was found not guilty. On count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution as it relates to Cassie, he was found guilty. Count 4, it was another sex trafficking charge, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion as it related to someone they refer to Jane, which essentially means that this is someone whose identity they are keeping undercover. He was found not guilty. And last but not least, count 5, transportation to engage in prostitution. He was found this one he was found guilty, okay, as it related to Jane. So in short, when it comes to the RICO charge, he was found not guilty. When it comes to both of the sex trafficking charges, he was found not guilty. And when it comes to the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, those 2 counts, he was found guilty. And for all considered purposes, if you're the defense, if you're Diddy, this is a win for you, right? Despite the fact that he was found guilty on 2 charges, the meat of his charges were the RICO charge and the sex trafficking charges. Those charges were the bulk of the prosecution's case, the bulk of the time that he would have spent in jail had he been convicted, right? And he was found not guilty on those charges. So all things considered, I'm sure Diddy and his team and his family and all those around him are very happy, and so are a lot of other people. But that is where we are today. What I want to talk about is a little bit of what I think brought us here in terms of the outcome. And, the reason why for me, right, where I was like, I am not going to get into the meat and potatoes of this Diddy case on this platform until there's a verdict, is because when you're dealing with a jury, anything can happen. To be honest, I don't know how else to put that. Anything can happen. This could have went multiple ways. And I know that there are a lot of people who are surprised by the outcome. I can't say that I'm surprised by the outcome. I am truly disappointed. When I heard the verdict, I felt, disappointment. For lack of a better word, disappointed. It really felt like how can we see all that this man has done and he still walk free on these charges? But understanding the way the jury works, understanding the legal nature of a criminal case. Just to provide a little bit of context, when we're talking about a criminal case, we're talking about a standard of proof that requires the prosecutors to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Diddy did whatever it is that they were accusing him of, right? And that's very important. Why is that important? Beyond a reasonable doubt is if there is even one iota of doubt, that's reasonable, right? That he did not do this, then you cannot convict him. So that means that you can have 15 reasons of, yup, he's probably guilty. But if the defense puts on your mind even one reason, one possibility that he did not, then guess what? He walks. That is a high burden of proof. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, there are a lot of different ways that this can go. You're dealing with a jury. There are a lot of challenges that I knew that the prosecutors were going to have to overcome to reach that threshold. And it appears that they just legally were unable to do so. And that is a large reason why I chose not to speak on the details or to really get into this until I knew the outcome of the verdict, because I was not keeping up with this case day by day like a lot of other people. There are a lot of different creators, analysts, people who are outside of the courtroom, in the courtroom, all of those things. I have a real job, okay? And I was not spending my time keeping that close attention to this case. But I know enough about the criminal system, juries, how all of this could play out that I was like, I really need to see how it plays out. So what I want to do now is I want to kind of talk about maybe why this is the outcome that was reached. And the way I want to do it is there's this article that CNN wrote, and they kind of broke down why the charges might have fallen the way they did. And I was reading it and I kind of got a sense of where they were going. So I'm going to read that. But I also want to start with the prostitution charges, because those are actually the charges where the jury said, okay, there's not a doubt in my mind that this man, did this. And so actually CBS News, they wrote that in order to find Combs guilty of the prostitution related charges, prosecutors must have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he knowingly transported an individual in interstate or foreign commerce and intended that the individual engage in an act of prostitution. So in other words, they're saying that the jury essentially felt like, okay, I feel that beyond a reasonable doubt, Diddy took Cassie or Diddy took Jane, and he intentionally went from this state to this state or this place to this place. And he did so with the intention of engaging in some type of, paying for sex, i.e. prostitution, right? They felt comfortable enough with coming to that conclusion. But, and as CNN notes, racketeering, conspiracy, RICO, whatever you want to call it, is incredibly difficult to prove, okay? We just saw this play out with Thug's case, right? That's his name? It was the Young Thug, right? I'm pretty sure it's Thug, yeah. Anyway, RICO, that has been the buzz of the past few years. We've seen a lot of RICO cases pop up here lately within the past few years. And even since the beginning of this trial, people have said, I know he's done some things, but when you are saying that someone is engaging in racketeering, that's a hefty charge. And so I think that there has been some doubts in terms of whether or not the prosecutors had enough to really pin him down on that. And so just kind of reading off of CNN, it says racketeering conspiracy, sometimes called a RICO charge, doesn't refer to a specific crime. True. Rather, it involves people engaging in an illegal scheme, and the charge is just difficult to prove. It says, when you look at the issue of RICO and racketeering, what you generally look at are mob bosses who have these underbosses who are furthering a criminal enterprise. CNN legal analyst Joey Jackson said, in Combs' case, prosecutors claimed he and members of his inner circle had engaged in crimes involving kidnapping, arson, forced labor, bribery, and sex trafficking, among others. For a conviction, jurors would have needed to find Combs and at least one other person had agreed to commit at least 2 relevant acts within a 10-year window. Here's where the problem kind of begins for the prosecutors. It says that jurors never heard any direct testimony from many of the people who they were saying claimed participated in the enterprise. And that's unusual for a racketeering trial. So it sounds like, so let's take a step back. So it sounds like in order for this racketeering charge to really have worked for the prosecutors, they would have had to basically have someone get on the stand and really talk about how Diddy was forcing them to engage in these some type of illegal activity, whether it was regarding arson, bribery, whatever criminal activity they wanted to, or not wanted, but whatever criminal activity they were saying was a part of this illegal scheme. Essentially, you would have needed someone under Diddy who worked for Diddy to say, yes, this was the illegal scheme that, we came up with, that we committed, right? But the jurors did not hear direct testimony of that nature. So it sounds like that was kind of like the first issue. Now, on the other side of that, it is very clear, based off of the fact that pretty much every single one of his bonds have been denied, that Diddy has and is known for engaging in witness tampering. Okay? We know this to be true. Why? Well, let's see. There are several people who have come out and already talked about the fact that this is kind of the nature of what he engages in. We see it in the explanations that the judge has given in terms of why he has been denied bond on several different occasions. He is so powerful that he can influence people. He can scare people from testifying. And so does that play into why perhaps there was no one that prosecutors had on the stand to really, say one thing from the next? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Okay. It says typically you have one of those mob bosses or the underbosses come testify saying him, the one sitting right there, i.e. in this case, it would be Diddy, told me to engage in arson, told me to bribe someone, extort this person. But according to this analyst, it says you didn't have that, nor did you have any other people besides Combs sitting at that table, right? Legal experts say that the prosecution may have overcharged him with, RICO. And that's not, that's not a new sentiment. That's something that people have said and talked about since the beginning of this trial, which is that RICO charge is going to be a hefty one to prove, especially with the standard that you have to prove it, especially considering all of the witness tampering, reputation stuff at hand. That's a tough one to prove. Okay. And so, and the guy mentions, it says, if you try to show racketeering as a prosecutor, you have to show that there was an organized criminal enterprise, that there was some structure to this, that there was a criminal operation that was ongoing and that was committed multiple crimes. They just did not have that proof. Could they prove that Sean Combs was a horrible human being, physically abusive, engaged in domestic violence? Yes, yes, and yes, but none of those are racketeering. And that is a fact. And here's the deal. Well, I'll get into the deal in just a second. So that's the racketeering charges, right? So that provides a little bit of insight into why the racketeering charge really did not pan out the way maybe a lot of people expected. It's a very difficult charge to prove, especially under this burden that the prosecutors had to meet. And, when you're not putting someone up there to just kind of blatantly say ABC 1, 2, 3, that was the conclusion that the jurors came to. Okay. So then we have the sex trafficking charges. The analyst says that prosecution's witnesses gave stunning testimony about the freak-offs and hotel nights, drug-fueled sexual performances they said Combs organized. So, that's kind of the part of this trial that I think we have all heard, right? You've heard about the baby oil. You've heard about the freak-offs. You've heard about, that's kind of some of the most prominent aspects of this case that pretty much everyone has heard about. It says prosecutors charged Combs with 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion, one related to Cassie, one his ex-girlfriend Cassie, and one related to another ex who testified under Jane, okay? Maria Cruz Melendez, who successfully prosecuted singer and music producer R. Kelly for racketeering, wasn't surprised that Combs was acquitted for the sex trafficking charges. She said that at the end of the day, the jury had to be convinced that coercion was happening within the dynamic of that relationship. But the defense argued the women wanted to spend time with Combs because they loved him and that their presence at the freak-offs or hotel nights was not due to violence and fraud. In addition, both women had long-term relationships with Combs, which was unconventional for sex trafficking cases, Jackson said. When you look at sex trafficking, you're looking at not a long-term relationship, generally of 11 years, as it related to Cassie, or 3 years as it related to Jane. And other people agreed, okay? It says these were individuals who had been in long-standing relationships with Combs, so there was a thin line between consent and coercion. A thin line that, of course, the defense exploited very effectively on cross-examination. And that, to me, is the key. That is the key to the sex trafficking charges. There is a thin line between consent and coercion. And that was really the back and forth that this case came down to, in my opinion, when it came down whether or not a jury is going to find him guilty on the sex trafficking charges. And the number one reason why I did not speak on this case prior to the verdict is because your conclusion of whether or not Diddy coerced Cassie, coerced Jane into these freak-offs, or whether or not they consented, has a lot to do with, in my opinion, where you fall within the culture. Because there's a lot of people who feel as if this was his girlfriend. How did he force Cassie to engage in a freak-off if that was his girlfriend? If, maybe night 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, she was down for the freak-off, and night 7 and night 8, she was like, nah. Well, night 1 through 5, people don't understand consent. People don't understand power dynamics. And a lot of people are forgetting the cultural nuance that this case exists in. And that's what I meant at the beginning of the pod when I said that this is a very interesting case, because it brings up a conversation that has been building over the past few years, ever since the beginning of, not ever since, but with the bringing of the Me Too movement. That's when we really, really started to see these conversations within the entertainment industry getting at whether or not people are consenting, or how does power play into all of these dynamics. And so now when you have this conversation and this question coming up within the terms of hip hop, right? Now you're having it come up in the conversation within the culture. It shook everything, not Diddy, right? But it's this ongoing conversation that we really have to get to the bottom of when it comes down whether or not you can coerce someone that you are in a relationship with. Now, the jury, they saw the evidence that was laid out before them. And they concluded that the prosecutors had not proved by the preponderance of the evidence, right?
Quick pause. Not by the preponderance of the evidence, but beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the standard of proof in a criminal trial, and that's what I meant when I was talking. But just to be clear, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, back to the video.
That Diddy coerced Jane or Cassie to engage in these freak-offs and to engage in, all of these things, right? That's what the jury decided. And that is where it stands. That is the outcome of this case. Whether you agree with it or not, that is where it's landed. And in terms of my recap of how this is playing out in the news, that is where this conversation ends. I want to be very, very clear before I transition. That is the outcome of the case. It has been litigated. That is the verdict. These jurors found that the prosecutors did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Diddy sex trafficked Cassie or Jane. They decided after seeing the evidence that the prosecutors did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Diddy coerced these women. Okay? That is the end of everything that's in the news. Now it's time to get into everything on my mind. And this is where it really becomes my opinion. Because I'm going to tell you right now, ain't nobody asked me. But if I was a juror, there is no way that I am concluding based off of the information that I know. Now, mind you, I don't know all of the evidence that was in front of the jury, right? So I'm going based off of the information that I am aware of from someone in the public, saying that based off of that information, if I was a juror, this is where I would go with it. It's not consent in my eyes. Okay? And let me tell you why. Number one, when Diddy met Cassie, she was 19 years old and he was 37. I'm not the best at math, okay? I'm not the best at I'm not the best at math. But that's nearly twice her age, okay? So we're already starting from this position of someone who is barely an adult, quite literally still a teenager. She was 19, okay? You're starting from the framework of, here's someone who is a teenager, barely an adult, dealing with someone who is 37 years, nearly 40 years old. That's a power dynamic right from the beginning. If you want insights into just how naive Cassie was when she met Diddy and around this, time of her just getting into his circle, he signed her to his record label, and I can't remember the exact number, but she signed on to a record deal which would require her to give like X amount of albums, this astronomical amount of albums that no one ever puts out, and she signed that deal. Okay? So we're already starting to see that there is a naivete to Cassie in terms of her life experience, her age. It's all reflected in this power dynamic. And then you introduce other considerations, right? Now that she's signed to a label, you're not even just talking about the fact that they were in a romantic relationship. We're talking about a situation between a boss and an employee. That's another power dynamic, right? So I know that people are like to put a lot of emphasis on the fact that, well, they were in this relationship, that was his girlfriend. That was also his employee. Not only was that his girlfriend, okay, who was 18 years younger than him, but that was also his employee. All of these things are existing at one time. Then you introduce different factors, i.e., abuse. We know for a fact that Diddy abused Cassie. I don't think that there's anyone who is denying the fact that he was abusive to that woman. We know that he forced her to shave off her hair. We know that he forced her to wear certain color nail polish. And if you haven't seen the video of him dragging Cassie up and down the hallway, stomping her out, beating her, the video exists. And I'm sure as hell not playing it on my platform. But the information is out there. So you see that there's elements of physical abuse introduced into this relationship. And for anyone who knows, and the prosecutors, they introduce an expert to kind of speak to this in greater detail, but there's a psychology behind people who are experiencing abuse, whether that be mental abuse, physical abuse, or both. There's a psychology that is attached when you are dealing with someone who is being abused. And you can't always get away from the abuser, right? Sometimes you still love that abuser. Sometimes you still care for the person who is abusing you, even as much as they're harming you, even as much as you want to get away, right? We see this girl literally trying to escape a hotel and being dragged back. We see times where she has tried to leave, and instead of just letting her leave, he literally blows up the car of the guy that she's with next, right? These are key go-to tactics of an abuser. Most women will try to leave, I think it's like 6 times before they're able to successfully leave an abusive relationship. The most dangerous time in a relationship between an abuser and someone being abused is when they try to leave. We're talking power dynamics. We're not just talking about, oh, this is my girlfriend. Oh, this is my boyfriend. We like to get nasty and get into some things. That's not what this is. That's not what this is. If you and your partner likes to engage in sex with other people, listen, as long as there is consent between adults, and no one is being harmed, that is between you and your partner. However, consent gets really tricky when you're talking about an employee and their boss. It gets really tricky when you're talking about somebody who is nearly twice your age at a point in time. It gets really, really tricky when you talk about someone who has been abusing you and who is literally in charge of every aspect of your life. He was in charge of her finances. He had access to her medical records. Her entire life was structured and controlled around what he wanted. How can you consent? How can I consent if I can't go anywhere if I say no? How can I consent if I might get harmed physically if I say no? Even if we are in a relationship, consent is constantly being updated. Like it's a very much in real time situation. I don't care if we've been in a relationship for 15 years. I don't care if we've been in a relationship for 45 years and every night I done gave you some. Whenever I say no, that's it. There is no more consent. And in order for there to be full effective consent, that means I have to have autonomy over where I go, over what I do without fear of being harmed for it, without fear of retaliation. Cassie did not have that. Cassie did not have that. In my eyes, Cassie did not have the autonomy over her decisions to really say, or not even to say, but to really escape from under Diddyverse. So how could she have consented? How could she possibly have consented? And even in the instances where we hear, there were times where she would refuse and that there were consequences. So I just feel like this idea that, well, they were in a relationship of 11 years and listen, within the culture that we live in right now, where people really don't understand power dynamics and people really don't understand what it means to consent, or what it means to understand consent, I am not surprised by this verdict because people just don't get it. People just don't get it. I don't know if it's ignorance. I think a part of it is ignorance. I think another part of it too is times have evolved. So we're calling it out now, but you have to think there are so many people who have probably had some brushes with consent in their past, and they're like, oh, this feels too close to home. Because if I call that out over there, I have to call out what I did maybe in the early 90s or what I did a decade ago. So I'm not gonna call it out there. I'm gonna say that this is she consented because she was in a relationship. Because if I open up that door, what does that say about me? What does that say about my homies? I think there's a lot of people afraid to call this what it is because they're afraid of what that means for their past behavior. But it is what it is. It is what it is. Regardless of where the culture is at, regardless of the fears behind why people aren't calling a thing, I'm about to call it a thing. I'm gonna call it what it is. We're not gonna sit here and act like there are not other factors that played a part when it comes to the dynamic of Cassie and Diddy's relationship. That's why, in my opinion, this verdict bothers me. I have respect for the jurors. I have respect for the outcome because at the end of the day, that is the judicial system that we live in. And I have more thoughts on that in just a second. But in my opinion, it's just sickening. And it's sad that we reach these conclusions because people are just straight ignorant of what it means to consent. It's sad. Another thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of, what's been on my mind as it relates to this case and the implications of this case is people are going to, and already have begun to, use this verdict as a means of excusing violence. That's how people are going to use this case, right? They're going to say, well, he got off. He was acquitted. He was acquitted of RICO. He was acquitted of sex trafficking. And they are going to kind of brush all of the other things, all of the other abuse that came out, the arson, blowing up people's cars, all of the other things that are going to just kind of get swept under the rug of, oh, well, he was acquitted. And I rebuke that. We are going to hold these people accountable to something. Yes, he got off on his charge. There's many reasons why that could have been, but there are facts that came out about Diddy. There is video of Diddy abusing Cassie. And for that alone, we should be washing our hands with them. For that alone, I mean, what else do y'all need? What else do y'all need? I'm very, very concerned about how quickly we are willing to forgive and forget the transgressions of people who we admire or people who hold power in our communities. Because what happens is when we completely disregard that bad behavior, we set a tone, we set a precedent, and we send a signal to all the other abusers in the community who really should be othered, who really should be out of our community. We send a signal, hey, it's cool, dog. It's cool. Diddy got off. Yeah, he dragged Cassie down the hall. Yeah, he stumped her out. Yeah, he blew up some cars. But we're gonna put that to the side. No, we're not. No, we're not. We cannot continue to put that to the side. And I don't care who you are. You could be Diddy. You could be the next door neighbor. Because here's the deal. People only start to care when it happens to them. It's kind of like one of my biggest pet peeves is when I hear a man say, or what do they say? They like, oh, don't do, you messing with my mama, you messing with my sister. Like the kind of men who only feel defensive over women who are in proximity to them, right? So it's like, oh, you can't disrespect this person, not because they're a human being worthy of respect, not because they're, a woman, but because they are your mom, your sister. It's still centering you at the end of the day, right? And it's just not cool. It's just not cool. It's not about you. It's not about whether or not it's happening directly to you. It's about the culture that we create. And a part of creating the culture is making it very clear what we do allow and what we don't allow. But when you are on social media and you are posting about free this person, free that person, after there's evidence and proof and admissions of the harm that they have caused against people who look like you, people that you say are within your community, what do you think happens? You're shaping culture. Culture is nothing but a group of people with shared beliefs. Thoughts, opinions, beliefs, backgrounds. And if the shared belief in a community is you can harm women, you can harm Black women, and we're gonna sweep it under the rug, that is the culture that you create. And that only perpetuates more violence against those same people. I don't understand why anybody is rooting for Diddy in any way. And I question anybody who is celebrating this man in any kind of way. I think you can have respect for the judicial system. You can have respect for the conclusion that the jury has come to, right? You can have respect for the fact that this man had his day in court, i.e. due process. Right? Those are objective things to, have respect for. But if you are celebrating the fact that this man is getting some type of relief, knowing what he has done to women, knowing what he has done to men, knowing what he has done, period, to people, something is not right with you. Because nothing about that man is good. Oh, he's created jobs. Oh, he's created iconic cultural moments in the community, in the culture, right? He is an icon, right? Because of the 90s, right? He's a mass marketer. He's a good businessman. He's this, he's that, and he's also an abuser. He's also an abuser. And if you're not going to take that into consideration, if it's okay for someone to make a good record or to go and play a sport to your liking, if that's all it takes for you to completely ignore them being an abuser, you got to start asking yourself some real deep internal questions. And I'm not saying that it's always easy, because I understand we get to come to an appreciation with, people in one way, right? Like you might have listened to Diddy all your life. Okay, you might have grown up on Diddy. Plenty of people have. You might really feel that level of attachment. And to you, it's beyond belief that he was capable of doing these things. I'm not saying that that's not beyond, beyond the experience of what some people are feeling right now. That's fair and that's valid. But you do have to reconcile that experience and that understanding of who he is with these other facts that have come out about who he is. And what you do with that, how you kind of maneuver that information, I'm not saying it's easy, but if you're going to sit there and completely disregard it, that is an issue. That is an issue because it sends messages to other people who are not Diddy's. It sends messages to the guy down your street that he can get away with this too, that it's okay in your community to beat someone, to harm someone, and it's not. So I'm concerned about the implications of this verdict for the culture and people within the culture who is going to excuse this acquittal as a means for excusing and ignoring the very real violence that we know was perpetuated against many people. I'm concerned about that. Another thing I wanted to talk about is kind of the hypocrisy, and I kind of hinted at this a bit, the hypocrisy that I've seen on social media in terms of just like this idea that maybe the jury didn't get it wrong, right? So like, again, I have respect for the outcome of the jury. I personally disagree. I didn't have all the evidence in front of me. I can only go based off of the evidence that has been made available publicly that I have consumed. And that is why I have these critiques of the outcome, right? But there are literally people, like I said before, it's just like, y'all don't know which way you want to go. So when Diddy is acquitted, it's okay, yep, they got it right, we trust the system. But okay, why are there people still online talking about some free Tory Lanez? They convicted him. They convicted Tory Lanez of pooming Megan Thee Stallion. Not only did he admit to doing it, but there is a conviction, and there are still these same people, the same group of people talking about some free Tory Lanez. Well, did the jury not get it right? Now the judicial system has let you down? I don't get it. Do we trust the judicial system? Do we not trust the judicial system? Same thing with R. Kelly. People are like, free R. Kelly. Well, he's been convicted. So are we not going to trust that jury? I think you can play it case by case and look at the facts and be observant and critical of each case. I'm fine with that. But what I feel like I'm seeing is we trust the jury when it's the outcome that we wanted, and we don't trust the jury when it's not the outcome that we wanted. And a lot of these times, the outcome that I use that loosely because I'm not included in that, but the outcomes that those group of people want is to protect the abuser. So when the abuser gets off, then the jury made the right decision. But when the abuser is convicted, we don't trust the judicial system no more. The jury had it messed up. Which one is it? And why are you always playing the side of the abuser? Why are you always on the side of the abuser? Why? That's another question that you need to be asking yourself. Why? Do you relate? Do some of these actions of the Tory Lanez and the Diddy remind you of things that you've done, things that you have seen your homeboys do that you didn't step in? I think that has a lot to do with it. I really do. I really, really do. And it's also just pure ignorance. Like I said, Tory Lanez admitted to shooting Megan. Literally, he admitted to it. And we still have people online talking about he ain't shoot her, free Megan, conspiracy this, conspiracy that. I am convinced that there are a group of people who you could literally, like, It's just sad. And what's even worse is, had there not been a video of Diddy dragging Cassie, there is so many people who would still be talking about, oh, she's lying. Oh, he didn't do that. Not because they have any real good faith reason to believing that he's not capable of that, but because they grew up on Diddy, because Diddy has done so much for the culture. So in their mind, they're not even willing to consider that people have personal lives, to consider that they don't know everything about a person. Do y'all not know that abusers are some of the most charming people? Do y'all not know that abusers are some of the, like, you cannot spot an abuser. It doesn't happen that easy. And victims, or people who are victimized, are not just these like slow or always super naive. I mean, anyone can fall into the trap of being abused by someone who is seeking to abuse. It's really just the way it goes. There are so many people who would probably tell you, I never thought it could be me. I worked this job. I have this level of education. I come from this background. I never thought it could be me, but he was so charming, or he looked like this, or he came from this background. You cannot spot an abuser. So for you to not even be able to consider the fact that he was capable of doing this even before a video, especially considering that majority of people who come out with allegations of being abused are telling the truth, then that's a you issue. That's something that you need to figure out, why you are so willing and wanting to defend an abuser. When the statistics tell you that most time when someone has the courage to step up and say, this person abused me, they're not lying. When we know that people can be different things to different people, but you were still willing, I guarantee you there is a group of people who would have still sat there and not even given her any level of credibility to her accusations without that video. And unfortunately, there are plenty of people who are still talking about I literally had a conversation with someone about the Diddy situation, and their response was something along the lines of like, oh, but that you only caught him in one moment. Excuse me? We only caught him in one moment? What is your point? That one moment was enough. How many moments, how many times is Diddy supposed to abuse Cassie before we can say that that ties into his character? How many times is an abuser, how many times does it take? Abuse is abuse. It's very, very, very problematic, the conversations people are having around this case. And I fear that the acquittal and people's lack of understanding of like the nuances of litigation and the nuances of burdens of proof and all of the things, it's only going to make it worse. Another point that I wanted to make is unchecked power and unchecked influence is dangerous. And I think I've already talked about why that is. I mean, and even I talked about this in a previous video as it pertains to Donald Trump and the White House and not checking people who are unhinged off of power. We see that play out. We see challenges happening every single day. Due process challenge, issues are arising as we speak because we have someone in the White House who thinks that he can do whatever he wants. And he's really trying and he's really testing y'all to see, I'm kind of getting away with it. Power is going unchecked. And so lives are being lost. It is dangerous. It is very dangerous. But the question that I have is, will the culture hold Diddy accountable? Will the culture hold him accountable? Because what we're seeing in the case, the verdict, that's in the legal courtroom, right? We got that. We respect that. It is what it is. What is the culture going to do? That's what I want to know. What are we going to do about it? I think it's up to people with common sense. Well, not common sense is not common. What did my mom say? Common sense ain't so common no more. And she's absolutely right. I don't even know what common sense is anymore, because it's just every time I think that there's a baseline understanding of what is common sense, I'm always shocked when I realize it's not that. But my question is, will the culture hold Diddy accountable? And the answer to that, only time is going to be able to tell. What does that mean? Well, he ain't gonna be in jail long. I mean, his sentencing is, I believe, October 3rd. So we won't know exactly how much time he will be in. He's gonna get about 10 months of serve time already. So, you know, when it comes down to it, he's gonna be out pretty soon. Okay, he ain't gonna be in there nearly as long as he would have been had he been found guilty on the RICO or the sex trafficking charges. So he's gonna be out. And when he gets out, will he be embraced by the culture? Will he be embraced by the community? Will he be embraced by hip hop? Will he be embraced by the entertainment industry? What does it look like for Diddy after all of the storm, after everything has settled? What is it gonna look like for him? Only time will tell, but I'm hoping that the culture holds him responsible for the violence that he has committed against all of these different people. I really hope that the culture realizes that there is real harm being done against women, against even men. Men were a part of this. I definitely think that sexuality is a piece of this puzzle that, you know, I didn't even go into, but should definitely be examined in terms of people's response to this trial, even perhaps how people respond to Diddy. But one thing that I want people to stop saying and stop bringing up, because it's utterly ridiculous. Not ridiculous. Let me not say it's ridiculous, but one thing I want people to stop doing is talking about, oh, they're just trying to tear down another black man. Oh, he was a billionaire. So, you know, the powers that be got scared and they were like, now is the time. People, y'all do realize that this all branched off of a lawsuit that was filed by Cassie, who identifies as a black woman. Let's start there. Second of all, even if there were powers at be who wanted to target Diddy because he's a billionaire and it's a challenge to the system, all of the things, it does not take away from the facts, which is he gave them something to work with. It doesn't take away from any of that. So I'm always confused when people bring that up, because it's like, okay, you bring that up to say what? Like, okay, let's say that people were, you know, the powers that be, the 1%, the super rich, they were like, oh no, we cannot have a black man be a billionaire. It doesn't take away from the fact that what they got Diddy on, they got him on. They have videos of him being a monster. Testimony came out that he was a monster. It doesn't take away from any of that. It doesn't. So what is the end goal when you bring that up? Just like my question is, what is the end goal when you talk about, well, Harvey Weinstein got away with X, Y, and Z. This white man over here got away with X, Y, and Z. What is your point? What is your point? It doesn't matter if a white man got away with more or got a lesser charge for doing it. Was still violent behavior. He should still be held accountable. Where is your moral compass? When people bring that up about what white people get away with in terms of situations like this to justify bad behavior of black men or black people, I always have to wonder, where do you derive your moral compass? Because when you do that, it sounds like you derive your moral compass from white people, whiteness, which only feeds into white supremacy, right? Because now you're saying that the line of good is determined by what white people decide. You don't think that's problematic? My morals, my understanding of what is decent and good is that's a internal situation that is in part derived from my relationship with a higher being. There are so many different nuances. I don't get that from what white people do, or what any other race of people do, or really what anybody else does. I come to the decision of what I think is morally good and morally right based off of what I think is good for other human beings. So to me, it's irrelevant that, a white man got away with it. So because a white man got away with it, we should let Diddy get away with it? Because a white person got away with abuse, we should let a black man get away with abuse? I just want people to follow their logic all the way through a little bit more, because the math don't be mathing when you really flesh it out. And that's a part of the reason why I have this platform, because there's too many people making statements on social media with huge platforms and the math don't be mathing because they're not fleshing it all the way out. Follow that thought all the way through. Follow it all the way through. When you make statements like that, comparing the morality or comparing what should happen to this race over here based off of this race over here, what you're saying is you derive your morality from another race, instead of individually coming to a decision on what you believe to be good versus what you believe to be bad. That's a problem. That's a problem. So please stop saying that. Please stop saying that. If you are one of those people who believe that they're trying to come down and tear down another black man, I want you to ask yourself, and if they were, why do you think that this man should still be excused when we know that he did X, Y, and Z? Ask yourself that. Follow these thoughts through. Follow these thought processes through. Challenge them. Get from outside of your bubble so that we can get to a place where we really figure out what the hell is going on. Because the state of the culture right now breeds Diddies. This case isn't just about Sean Combs, Diddy /Love/ whatever name he's going by right now. This case is way bigger than Diddy. This case is about a culture where he was able to not only survive, but he was able to thrive. This is about checking ourselves and checking our communities and checking the people next to us to get a sense of why was someone like Diddy able to thrive around us when all of these people around knew what he was doing, knew that he was abusing people, knew that all of the drugs and stuff that were involved. People knew. People knew this, and he still was able to reach such a peak in his career as an icon. He was just awarded by the BET Awards a few years before all of this went down, a Lifetime Achievement. I think it was a Lifetime Achievement Award by the BET Awards. When all of these people in the industry knew what time he was on. This isn't just about Diddy. This is about the people around him. This is about the enablers. This is about the signals that you're gonna send to your daughter or to your son when you're reposting on social media talking about some "I'm glad he got free," or when you're at the dinner table talking about some "I can't wait to go turn on that Diddy." That's what this is about. It's about the culture. It's about whether or not we are going to hold him accountable. Not in the courtroom. His day in the courtroom is done. He's gonna get his sentencing. That's gonna be that. But what are we gonna do? That's my question. Because if we just pretend like this didn't happen, or if we just go back to business as usual, we're only creating a space for more Diddies to emerge. And y'all should be tired of that by now. Y'all should be tired of that by now, unless you are an abuser or you are okay with people who engage in abusive activities. I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know what's going to happen. I can only hope that we don't let this slide. I can only hope that when Diddy comes out of jail, he is not welcomed with open arms back onto these major platforms, back into these spaces, into these rooms. I can only hope that he goes somewhere and sits down and stay far, far away from people. I can only hope that he gets the help that he needs. And most importantly, I can only hope that the people who he has harmed, Cassie, others, recognize the importance of speaking up. Because in this culture where people will completely ignore you, make you look like you are just some gold digger, I can only imagine how hard that was. And I don't even understand the whole gold digger situation. Like from the sense of the defense, obviously that was part of their, whole deal, right? That was part of their defense. But y'all have to understand, even if she was just around for his money, it doesn't excuse his behavior. Even if she was just around for his money, it doesn't excuse him dragging her up and down a hall. It doesn't excuse him stumping her out. Again, I need y'all to follow these thoughts through. Oh, well, she just wanted to be around for clout. So that entitles him to be able to beat her? Make it make sense. Make it make sense. And I'm gonna be on y'all. Don't let me see something on social media once he gets out and there's a platform of somebody who's praising him, or, oh, Diddy announced his partnership with this person or that. I am calling it out. I'm calling out bad behavior. I'm so tired of these toxic people getting away with harming other people, especially in our communities. It's not okay. We have to hold them to task. And if there's nothing else you get from this podcast, of this episode, please just understand that we are setting the tone. We are shaping the culture. And that can go really bad, or we can do something new. We can change it up. And the only way we can change it up is by calling it out. If you see your homie doing something that seems sketchy, call him out. Call him out. I promise sometimes I be like, y'all men afraid of each other. Y'all won't even call each other out. So yeah, this conversation, I could honestly talk about this for hours and hours and hours and hours, but I won't. I think I've made my points. Let me just make sure that I have made all of my points. Yeah, that's it. That is the ends of what I want to talk about so far. Maybe I'll bring it back up depending on how the sentencing goes. And I'll keep you guys updated on, the state of where this all falls, my opinions on it as always. Again, it's just very important to me to speak out on these type of topics and to provide a little bit more nuance, because nuance is key. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there before I add another 10 minutes to this video. I appreciate you for watching. I thank you for watching. And I will talk to you soon.